So Jay, we're one game into the Boston Celtics preseason, and everything looks good so far. How much fun was that?
That was a lot of fun. Obviously non-NBA competition, but I mean, Celtics just rolled them from the start. Everyone involved. Offense looked great, 56% shooting. Man, they look good. And it looked like they were building on last year and going back to all the success they had last year with the ball movement and all that. And we're not going to overreact because it is game one. It is against Olimpia Milano, which is starting like small forwards at center and stuff. But
And which apparently has not won a game against an NBA team in its existence, as the broadcast pointed out.
yeah, that's a solid stat there.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was 124 to 91 win, and I thought one guy who really stood out was David Lee,
Hmm.
and his passing in the starting lineup could really change things because they didn't have a lot of playmaking last year in that unit. It was like Marcus Smart, Evan Turner, those guys made some plays. Avery Bradley obviously can't do a lot of it, but David Lee is a type of big man who you can run offense through. He made so many great passes today in transition, outlet passes, out of the post. He just had a really good game, and you can tell how he's going to impact the offense. To go from Brandon Bass to David Lee in playmaking is like going from one of the worst passing big men in the entire league, no pass Bass, to a guy who now Brad Stevens is calling a point forward, and he showed that he could do some of those things against Olimpia Milano.
Definitely. And it's, you make the comparison to Bass, and it's also something to keep an eye on when, Brandon Bass really had one or two things he could do on offense when he was trying to score the ball. He could pick and pop. He had that mid-range jumper, and he's got, the any kind of like little dump off around the rim. He could get up and dunk it if he needed to. And just the difference with David Lee is really clear. He can post up if he needs to. He can, run a pick and roll and then post up. He can run a pick and roll and just score, off the roll. And then he's got all the passing as well. So I think, as a passer, that's crucial, and it just kind of adds to all the extra offense that he's going to bring as well. I think, when you look at the starting lineup and you look at how much that's going to improve things, he was a really nice kind of underrated pickup for them, over the summer.
Yeah, and we're talking about him like he's going to be in the starting lineup. He was in the starting lineup for the first game. Brad Stevens said he could change things throughout the preseason. But if it is a switch from Bass to Lee, that's a big change in playmaking. Another thing, the lineups. Obviously, there wasn't a lot we could glean from it, but for now, Stevens stuck with mostly the same starting lineup from last year. Jay Crowder started at small forward instead of Evan Turner, who was hurt. So who knows whether that'll continue. And then David Lee started at power forward, and he looked really good with that team, that first unit. So I think that's probably something they'll want to keep, just because he does give a lot of playmaking. If Isaiah Thomas is going to be in that second unit, you might want Lee in that first. What do you think about the lineups? Did anything stand out to you?
Yeah, they did. I mean, the starting lineup was obviously, a lot of fun. I believe Crowder, he began starting in the playoffs last year. I think was the first time he did, if I remember correctly. And obviously Turner's health will have a lot to do with that. One of my favorite lineups they put out there wasn't all that successful. It was the start of the second quarter, and it was Amir Johnson, Jerebko, Thomas, Smart, and Hunter. And it was one of those kind of really Stevens-esque lineups that had either Jerebko or Crowder playing the four. Amir obviously can kind of play both, and they had him obviously playing center. It had all the shooting with Hunter and Smart spotting up, and then obviously it had Thomas, who is probably the team's best scorer. And I just think lineups like that offensively are kind of they really kind of showcase what Stevens can do. Hunter Stevens loves those dribble handoffs, and Bradley ended up taking a lot of long twos off that last season, which is something he said he wants to cut down on. But Hunter is kind of a really nice potentially player. I mean, we're talking about him, like he's an established player and he's a rookie who just played against an overseas team. But he did a good job, taking those dribble handoffs, making passes. He can make shots if he needs to. And I think in a lineup like that, that was a fun one, and I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on as they go forward. That might be one of the second or third lineups they put out there during a game with Jerebko playing the four. Other than that, I think like you said, the starting lineup was interesting. The combination of Lee and Zeller was kind of fun. We've talked quite a bit about David Lee playing center during the season. That might or might not happen. Zeller is still probably one of the most complete centers on the team. And I think putting him next to Lee kind of started things off nicely, especially since they went to all those post ups early.
Yeah, I think my main takeaway was that Stevens, his job is going to be so tough this year because there's just so many players who can play. Jared Sullinger was the fifth big guy off the bench. Stevens has said before he likes to play four big guys. And then Sullinger has 14 points on 7 of 10 shooting, gets 4 offensive rebounds, and looks pretty good.
Yeah.
No matter what Stevens does, then Hunter, he plays well. He looks pretty good. He's a shooter for a team that didn't have a lot of shooting last year. When Evan Turner gets back, he's probably not even in the rotation.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot. I mean, there are a ton of options Stevens can use. There's not a lot of separation between the last 3-4 guys in that rotation. And it's going to be fascinating to see how he figures it out and whether he switches it every game. I don't think he wants to do that.
Right.
But he's going to have to do a lot of massaging of egos this year because they have a lot of guys who can help and think they should play. And a few of those guys won't be playing. So
yeah,
that was my biggest takeaway from that.
Definitely.
Any,
I also thought he did an interesting job, kind of trying to mix in the young guys, which is going to be the other serious challenge he has this year. Is he's got these veterans, he's got Amir Johnson, he's got David Lee, he's got all these guys who can play power forward, but he's also got Jordan Mickey, and I mean he's got these young guys who could really use minutes and might not help them win games this season, but these are talented young guys who could actually kind of make a difference. And I think that's going to be the other thing, how he kind of combines these guys, how he plays with the fact that the Celtics want to win right now. And they also have all these young pieces. I think that's going to be something really fascinating to watch, not just in preseason. That's going to be something that carries over into the regular season as well.
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic there because, like, a guy like Lee, obviously, his playmaking has stood out in training camp. It stood out in their first game of preseason. Do you give him minutes when Sullinger's, the 23-year-old guy who is just still developing? Obviously, it looks like he's going to. So we'll see. Stevens has so many options, so many choices, and it really will be fascinating to see how he does it, how he goes with that.
Definitely. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the next one in Spain. Any final thoughts before we put an end to this one?
Not really. That was just a thorough offensive clinic for Boston. They really, really played well all the way through.